is Leslie Gill Long, and I'm currently working as a science facilitator for the Seedlings Foundation, which is a nonprofit that promotes good education of all sorts. I wanted to be a teacher from the time that I was pretty little, and that impulse never left me. So I, number one, love teaching kids, and that's my first priority. I also happen to love all things science, and so the two of those just very naturally married to me becoming a science teacher. Taught children for over 30 years, most recently at the Foot School. I just retired from there last year. I taught primarily 8th grade science. I taught all of the 8th graders physical science. I was department chair and was coordinator of the lower school science program. So that involved kids from kindergarten up through 9th grade. You know what it was, really was an excellent teacher. I did not go into college thinking that I wanted to be a teacher, but I didn't want to be a science teacher. I loved science and I was very curious about the world, but it didn't occur to me that that would be a path that I would follow until I took a course from a really inspiring professor. And it wasn't that he was particularly gregarious or dynamic in his sort of personality. He was a chemistry professor who was a little bit dry, but he presented the material in such a way that it was completely compelling and fascinating. And he connected the topic of chemistry to biology and geology. He sort of somehow managed to make all of science clear and interesting. And so really it was a teacher who inspired me. And it wasn't until I was a sophomore in college that happened. And then I took every single science course that I could fit in all sorts of disciplines. And they didn't count toward my major, but I loved it so much that I just continued, and I've continued beyond my undergraduate, and taking all the courses that I can get because it's so intrinsically interesting to me. A big part of my responsibility, I felt, in teaching kids was to help develop a scientifically literate citizenry. And a way to do that in sort of a larger scope is to educate teachers so that they can educate kids, and that has a sort of a multiplier effect. To really understand science, to not be afraid of science, and to be able to promote it with their children and with their students and with their students' parents. I'll tell you one thing science isn't. It is not a collection of facts. I think that science is as much a process as anything else, and I think it's really the process of using evidence to answer questions. And those would be questions about the natural world, about the material world, about phenomenon that we observe. So really, it's asking and answering questions. It's crazy when I see these lists of, in middle school classrooms or even sometimes in elementary classrooms about what science is and following the scientific method. And I think we can reduce it. Sometimes that's lots of rigid steps. That's not what you see in most good science classrooms. So really, it's boiled down to asking questions and answering them using evidence. And we can expand that. We can say communicating your results, analyzing the data. All of that comes in, but at the heart of it is questions and evidence in answering those questions. The body of information, of facts, grows and grows and grows, and none of us has just access to that in our minds, we can't be expected to do. That's not a good use of our mind to memorize lots and lots of facts. Facts come in handy. With my 8th graders, they used to come in thinking they had to memorize the periodic chart. It's like, no. You have that periodic chart. On the other hand, if you use it enough and do enough chemistry, which is basically what they were doing, some of those facts become sort of part of your memory bank. But there's no point in memorizing things that you can look up unless it's something that you need to have ready access to. And it can be fascinating. Sometimes you just want to know more. I had one child who wanted to learn it in both, I'm talking about the order of the periodic chart, to learn it in both English and in Chinese, a language that he was studying. That's great, that's cool, that's fine. But more important is to see it as a tool, and it's useful in that way. Well, you know, one place where that was nicely articulated was when STEM education first came about, and it was the National Science Foundation who coined that phrase. And what they really wanted was for it to be cross-disciplinary, and not just science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but rather across all of the disciplines, because we know our work on child development, and not my personal work, but the work that I've read about and that I understand, is that it's just more meaningful to people to learn within a larger context. Information that kind of stands alone, it can be very interesting, but when you can apply it more broadly, there's no question that it's just more meaningful. There's not a discipline that I can think of really, or few, that to which science can't be connected. Take, for example, biology and chemistry, right? Biological processes are chemical processes, right? And all of it, I'm married to a physicist, he would argue that all of it is governed by the laws of physics. So yeah, this doesn't stand by itself. My perspective is that once one embraces that, it can actually make life easier. It actually frees teachers and gives them time, because while they're teaching literature, they could be reinforcing the science concepts and the other way around. For example, one of the big things that we see in science is pattern, right? We see patterns in data. We see patterns in just all sorts of things. Pattern is also a big thing in art, and art and science just seem like easily integrated and combined topics. There's a lot of art and science. There's a lot of science and art. Life isn't divided like that, and school shouldn't be either. It's artificial to me. Cannot imagine not approaching so much of what I do from a scientific perspective. When I buy things and think about the safety of those things, I want to know that they've been tested. When I think about my health and what I'm going to do to maintain my health, get vaccinations, or I look to evidence. I trust the scientific process. I know that there is a group of scientists that have gone through peer review before decisions are made, before recommendations are made. It has to do with health. It has to do with safety. It has to do with the viability of our world, because we're making decisions about what cars to buy. We're making decisions about what forms of energy we're willing to accept. And we simply have to look at the data. We don't look at it at our own peril. So it's an intrinsic part of my life, and I can't imagine it not being. What better do we have to go by? What better is there than that scientific process? And I think people don't understand this process of peer review. Peer review really, It gives us the best that is available. That's not to say that that things can't change, that recommendations can't change. If the evidence changes, it doesn't invalidate what's been done. It only represents further progress in what's been done. But I think folks don't realize that. And when they hear that something that has been scientifically validated has become invalidated, it makes them skeptical about the whole process. But that's the way it works. We're constantly furthering our knowledge and modifying, scientists are modifying recommendations based on that knowledge. So it's dynamic and it's just critical to an informed citizenry. Science may not be perfect in terms of making recommendations to us, but there is nothing better. There's nothing better, and I trust it. I think most kids come to us with innate curiosity. I shouldn't say most kids. I've never met a kid that didn't. But still, by the time they're a little older, they have a very rigid idea of what a scientist is. And if you were to ask them to draw a scientist, they would probably draw a male in a white coat with maybe kind of wild hair and a big head. Certainly by the time they're in middle school, they often see science as something sort of otherly, not them, not something that they can be. That notion can be disavowed by showing them that scientists come in all stripes and that they can be scientists. And the best science education simulates the process of science. They're asking questions, they don't know the answer to those questions. They're taking data. The data is what answers the question. They understand that that data has to be reproducible. And you know what? The data tells the story. It just works out. I don't have to fudge anything. The data tells the story. Sometimes they'll draw conclusions. I ask them to engage in productive argument about those conclusions and to communicate them to their peers. And that's science. That's going through the process of science as closely as possible to the work of laboratory researchers. Most of the teachers that I work with are preschool through probably 8th grade. And those who aren't science specialists, and most of them aren't, they probably have had a science methods course, they've probably had some science classes, but I think it wouldn't be unfair to say that a lot of them are a little bit fearful about science. I think that even though some of them are young and should have gone through an inquiry-based program, they think that science is this list of facts and that they can't possibly learn this list of facts. And you know what? I don't have that list of facts. All of science, that's a lot of stuff. So that's what we have to change, is for them to understand that if a child asks a question, you are not unsuccessful if you don't know the answer to that question. What makes you successful is if you're willing to say, well, let's find out. And sometimes that means shifting the question a little bit. If a preschooler asks you something about why the sky is blue, you are not going to go into all of the spectrum, and the explanation for that is a deep explanation, right? But what you can do is turn that question around to say, well, is the sky always blue? What does the sky look like in the morning versus in the evening? A teacher's job, I think, in part, is to shift non-investigable questions to investigable or testable questions. And that very often is to take away the big how to what if, or the big why to what if we did this, or and you can relate that to almost any question that a child has, and that's not to dismiss their questions. You can give them you can give them an answer that they can understand. That's a challenge to answer a tough question in a way that a little child can understand. But to have them investigate it is really, I think, what we're shooting for here. It's a whole paradigm shift, I think. The ones that we help to train at the seedling, they're surprisingly open to it, especially once they've had practice at it. I think it's very comforting to know that you don't have to have all the answers, and that you can just explore with the kids. That's actually really the ideal. So once you get into beyond primary school, it's nice to have enough background knowledge to be able to direct the questioning in a way that is really meaningful. But I think we're teaching teachers to have some confidence, because you know what? They can do it. Every teacher can do that. And it's joyful. It's so much fun to do that. It's exploration. Kids love it and adults love it. You know what's really nice also now, you see a lot of citizen science where people are actually taking data, they're maybe recording populations in their area or whatever, that actually becomes part of a larger database that I think that's really, really cool. We're all scientists at some level, if we're at all curious. Having just said that you don't have to know all the answers, one thing I would say for somebody who really wants to become a science educator is to get as much coursework under your belt as you can, because that also helps with confidence. Now I'm talking about people who are going to be science teachers, not elementary teachers who are required to teach a broad range of subjects. The more science knowledge I have, I guess the more confident I am and the more intrigued I am. Every time you encounter something as fascinating as whatever, a topic in chemistry, that prompts more questions, that prompts a desire to learn more. For somebody who loves science, study some science yourself. There's great literature out there about how kids best learn science. There's a lot of work that's been done by cognitive scientists and others who study the way that children learn. There's great literature out there that's really, really inspiring, and that I think makes one, first of all, better understand how kids learn, and does a nice job of helping us to understand how science is best taught.